Recently on the channel, we've been discussing key bindings in Sublime Text, what they are, how to create them, how to make one that is specific to certain situations. And in response to a question from a user, today we're going to be covering how to look at the Python source code for the commands that you're binding. And along the way, we'll also be discovering a way to see a list of almost every command that exists in Sublime Text and all of the packages that you have installed. Hello, fellow Sublime Text fanatics. Odatner here, and by viewer request, welcome to a video about how to look at and find the source code for the commands that you're building in Sublime Text. And before we get into that, I'd like to remind you that your continued support is what makes my continued production of these videos possible. So if you're finding them in any way helpful, useful, or informative, please don't hesitate to use those buttons down below the video to thumb subscribe and share as you deem appropriate. That really helps me out. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for other topics, also don't hesitate to drop down into the comment section and leave them there. The result of that is something like this video, because in the comment section of a previous video, I was asked a question by Ashwin Shenoy, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who asked, how does one view the source of the commands these key bindings activate? And that's a great question because there's a variety of reasons you might want to look at the Python source code to the commands that you're binding. If you're new to plugins and you'd like to know how commands are implemented, what better way to do that than by finding a command that does something similar to what you'd like to do to see how someone else has done it. That's a great way to learn. And as you step up the rungs of the ladder of Sublime Text Mastery, you may even find yourself wanting to modify existing commands to make them work the way you want them to work. And this is the gateway to that as well. Now, it turns out that this is actually really simple and easy to do because the functionality comes shipped directly with Sublime by way of the view package file command. As we've seen this in previous videos, it shows you a list of all of the files in all of the packages that are currently installed, and you can filter. So we know plugins are always Python files, so by doing that, we can see a list of just all of the Python files. Now, at this point, you need to know what package it is that the command that you're interested in is coming from so that you can filter this list a little bit more. So if you were interested in commands override audit created, then you would use that as a filter, and so on. Now, the commands that ship with Sublime generally are in the default package, so that's what we might do here. So we might use default as the filter, and now there's just a list of the plugin Python files that exist in the default package. And let's say, for example, you were interested in that echo command that I talked about in the previous video you could use if you were testing key bindings. You could just look at the echo Sublime, the echo plugin, and see that it is indeed the world's simplest plugin that just prints to the console, and the version of the command that we were using in that previous video uses the exact same functionality to display a dialog box instead of printing. Or you might be interested in the commands that change the size of fonts up and down when you choose the options from the menu. So again, you go to view package file, you're going to know that's probably in the default package, and that it's a Python file, and that it's related to fonts, and here's the font.py, and here's the increase font size command and decrease font size command. Or you may be interested in knowing exactly how it is that Sublime opens your settings and key bindings and such in that split window with the defaults on the left and yours on the right. So again, go to the command palette, view package file, that is default functionality, and in that case, that's something settings related, and here's settings.py right here, and here's the edit settings command. Now, this makes this look ridiculously easy, and to some degree it is if, like me, you've spent a lot of time looking through packages like the default package to see exactly how it is that Sublime ticks. But as we'll know, if you watch the video on how plugins work in Sublime and how to apply one, the name of the plugin file doesn't really matter at all to Sublime as long as it's unique within the package. It's the name of the class that's defining the command that is what is Sublime is looking for. So depending on the packages involved, it can be kind of tricky to figure out this because it requires you to guess what someone else named their files. Now, of course, there's other things you could do. You can get your hands on the Sublime package file, which is just a zip file extracted somewhere safe, never modify a Sublime package file yourself, because you will cause problems for yourself in the future if anything ever updates and those changes are clobbered away. And you could search around in them like that. But it turns out that with some clever use of plugin code, we could actually get at that information as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, of course, if you were to create a plugin and store it in a package folder like your user folder, or install a package that contains plugins, then we know that Sublime's going to find those plugin files and it's going to load them, and it's going to look to see if they're changing and reload them where appropriate. As a part of that loading mechanism, the plugin subsystem keeps track of all of the commands that are being created by all of the plugins that it is loading. So what we can actually do is introspect the plugin system to ask it what commands are being made available by plugin. So what I'm going to do here is go to the command palette and use this command to open the Stealthy and Hasty GitHub organization in my browser. And there's a link to this down in the description, so you don't have to worry about typing this in yourself. This is an organization that is run by me and my good friend Keith Hall, who's also very active in the Sublime Text community. And of the repositories that are here, the one that is perhaps most interesting for our case here is the Sublime Scraps repository, which has a variety of different plugins and things. And generally, when Keith or I answer questions on the forum or on Stack Overflow or in other places, if those plugins are useful and handy, we leave them here as examples for other people to look at. So there's a folder inside of this repository named plugins, and there's a command, there's a plugin in here named generate command list, and this is the plugin that we are going to be using in this particular video. And what this does, as I said, is it introspects the plugin system in Sublime to find all of the command classes for commands that have been allocated, and it generates a list of them in a buffer and shows you what kind of command they are, what package they came from, and what arguments that they take. I'm not going to go ahead and go through this here because by and large it's Python code that's specific to Python itself and not to Sublime Text. And if you're unfamiliar with how to take a plugin like this and apply it to Sublime, there is a video on the channel that talks all about that, there should be a card up above my head there that you can look at to see how you could put this into your copy of Sublime. Now, in my copy of Sublime here, I've already got that plugin installed and I've bound the command to a key, and when I press it we end up with a tab labeled command list, and this lists every command that is stored in every plugin across every package that is defining a command. So it can be quite the intimidating wall of text. But if I was to fold it down, we can see that what it's done is it's broken out all of the commands by package in roughly the order packages are loaded. So default is first, user is going to be at the bottom, all the other packages are in there sorted in roughly alphabetical order. And inside each package, the commands are broken out by the type of the command that it actually is. And getting into that is more of a plugin development topic that we don't really want to touch on here. If you're interested in this, just to be able to see what commands are available to bind them to a key, for example, or add them to a menu, then the type of the command doesn't actually matter. It really only matters when you get into the nitty-gritty of working on the code inside of these commands. But if we were to look at the actual thing here, now the way these are laid out is to tell you the command, the package that the command is in, the module that the command is in, and the name of the actual command, and then any arguments that it might take. And if you're not a Python developer, then this might be slightly confusing. So in that case, it's enough to know that the very first item in here is the name of the package, the very last item is the name of the command, and the thing right before the command is the name of the file that this particular plugin is stored in. So the echo command is stored in a file named echo inside of the default package. And the commands decrease font size, increase font size, and reset font size are all inside of a file named font inside of the default package. And so on down the line. We can see here also that the settings command is, the edit settings command rather, is inside of a file named settings in the default package. So thinking back to the previous part of the video, those are the files that we looked at in order to see those things. And this is an example of how you could find that easily just by searching for the name of the command. Now, other things that this will show you is the argument that the command takes. which is and is not sometimes helpful because the information here is garnered entirely by asking the Python runtime system what these commands declared that they take. So we can see, for example, the font size commands don't take any arguments at all, and neither does the install package control command as well. The edit settings command takes arguments for base file, user file, and default, and some of those have default values as well, so you really only need to pass the base file. Interestingly enough, the echo command takes any and all arguments because it doesn't care what you give it. It's just going to print them to the console anyway. And likewise, where we see no command description available here, that is taken from the actual code inside of the file as the documentation comment. If you're a Python developer, you'll know what that's all about. And not all commands are declared that way. So a lot of them will say no description available. But if we were to slide this down just a little bit, we could see, for example, that the detect indentation command examines the contents of the buffer to determine the indentation settings. And whether you see documentation for this is 100% up to the person that wrote the actual command. Now, it behooves me to point out at this point that this is a list of almost, but not quite, every command that is currently available in Sublime at any given point. What this is technically is a list of all of the commands that have been loaded from Python plugin files and registered with the plugin host. There are actually some commands that are core to Sublime that are implemented in the application itself and not as Python files, and those commands are registered with the plugin system in a different way and not this way, so those commands aren't exposed to be seen here. So in order to know about those commands, you'd have to look in the default key bindings to find them, and you can't look at the source for them. Now, there are a variety of commands that fall into this category, and they're commands that are implemented in the core for a variety of reasons. One of those is speed and performance reasons. If it's something that happens a lot, like inserting text, or something that is more performance related, like working with Git files, then that is something that's implemented in the core for speed and efficiency. They can also be implemented in the core just because they're doing something that hasn't been exposed to the plugin API. And in order to do that, it has to talk to the application core itself. And again, examples of that would be the commands that know how to interface with Sublime Merge. That's not something that's exposed by the plugin API, knowing if a file is tracked by Git. So that has to be done by the internals of the application instead. And lastly, these commands are implemented in the core because normally, Sublime, as I said, works by having a Sublime application and a plugin host, and all plugin commands run in the plugin host. So imagine a situation where a plugin goes rogue and the plugin host crashes or becomes unresponsive, and you have to kill it. If all of the commands were implemented as plugins, say for example the save command, there's no way for you to recover and save your work before you quit Sublime to make sure you don't lose anything. So some of the core commands are also implemented there to make sure that in the unlikely event that something happens to the plugin host, you still have a chance to save your work and not lose anything before things restart. Lastly, one last thing to note is that it is possible for packages to contain not only Python source files, but precompiled Python bytecode as well, if the author of that package wants to keep some of their code a secret. For example, Wilbon, the author of Package Control, also has a commercial package available called SFTP for doing remote file operations. And because that package is commercial, it primarily consists of precompiled bytecode files to try to keep the source of how the package is working under wraps. And in a case like that, those commands will appear here in the command list that this plugin generates because they are coming from the Python plugin system, but they don't correspond to source files, so you can't look at them via view package file. Or rather, you could try, but you're likely to just see some hexadecimal information instead. So those commands are not ones that you could look at the source code for, but if you wanted to know that they existed, that is possible to do here. So we can see just by using the functionality that's shipped with Sublime, you can find and look at the source code to most any command that you might be interested in. And with a little bit of extra plugin code sprinkled on the side, you can make finding the appropriate file even easier. Now, I hope you found this useful and informative, and it's going to help you in your day-to-day use of Sublime Text. And if it is, then please do use those buttons down below the video to thumb, subscribe, and share as you deem appropriate, because your support is what makes the continued creation of these videos possible. And like Ashwin, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for other topics, then please do drop down to the comments section and leave those there. And you can also, of course, ping me on Twitter at ODATNerd as well. But until the next video, this is ODATNerd asking you to please have a sublime day.